Okay, I'm going to give a quick rundown of how fantasy basketball works for our league and how our league works for those people who are new. So, the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you have the ESPN fantasy app downloaded prior to our draft. You want to go in and make sure that you set up your team and you're familiar with things before the draft happens. You can also use the web version of ESPN's website, which I actually prefer, but I think most people will probably use the app, so I want to give an overview of that. So it's the Salt Lake City Fantasy Basketball League. You'll get a link or an email to set up your team if you haven't already. Um, we'll come back to this, but I want to kind of give an overview real quick of just how fantasy basketball is played. It's similar to fantasy football in a lot of ways, but different. So, like fantasy football, you're going head to head against an opponent every week. Um, but we don't use fantasy points, at least not in our league. We actually use the true stats of the players. So there's 8 different categories that we compete in. It's field goal percentage, free throw percentage, and then threes, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and points. So each week you'll go up against another owner in our league, and these will be a sum or an average of your active players' statistics throughout the week. And then at the end of the week, whoever is winning the most categories will win the matchup. It is possible to tie. So if you win 4 and lose 4, for example, you would tie the matchup. And this year, we don't have any sort of tiebreaker during the regular season, but during the playoffs, the tiebreaker would be your points category. So that's kind of how it works. Giving a quick overview of our league settings and how the season's going to go. So you can have about 10 players on, well, that's not true. You can have 10 active players, so 10 starters, and then a couple additional players on your team that would make up your bench. And I'll get more into that in just a minute. There is an undroppable players list, so there's certain players that ESPN says, they're too good to drop, so you just can't. The lineup changes will lock individually at the scheduled game time, which means, whenever a player's game starts that day, you're not going to be able to move them from the bench to a starting spot or vice versa. We do use a waivers system, and so what that means is when a player is dropped from a team, they go on to waivers, and then there's a waiver order for all the teams, and whoever's on the top of that list would get first dibs if they tried to claim that player, and that rotates every time someone does claim a player off of waivers. That's basically just to make sure that everything is fair and that one team can't just go in and keep taking the best available players. And you'll notice as well that there's a matchup acquisition limit of 7, which means each week you can only pick up 7 players. And again, that's just to make sure that nobody is just dropping and picking up players nonstop for the whole matchup. There's also a 1-day waiver period, which means you can make your claim, but then there's going to be 1 day before that player who was dropped and is on waivers can actually, that waiver claim will be processed. So it's a 1-day buffer. We don't have a trade limit, but we do have a trade deadline, and that's going to be the final week of the regular season. So once the playoffs start, you won't be able to make trades anymore. Not doing keepers, basically what that means is that every single year we're just planning on redrafting from scratch. So we're not going to be doing any sort of like a dynasty format. And then, it looks like we do actually have a matchup tiebreaker. So it's points. So there you go. And then as far as the draft works, it's a snake draft. The order is randomly determined an hour before the draft starts, and so um, it's pretty straightforward. You just pick your players, and it's pretty standard. As far as setting your lineups goes, again, 10 players that you can have active each day, and then you have your bench. Um, the trick is really just to make sure that you've got your lineups set. Like, if you don't set your lineups, you're probably going to lose, but you can do it in advance. So it's not uncommon for people to go in just about like once a week and set their lineups for the week. And so that way you don't have to go in and do it every single day. Um, but the tricky thing is just that sometimes there's going to be days when all of your players are having games, or there's, you know, you can't play all of the players that are in a certain position, and you're going to have to be selective and strategic about which people you decide to start. So um, that's pretty much the gist of it, I think. If you have more questions, just reach out and let me know. Um, but hope everyone has a great time, and good luck.